This is our last in a series on writing basics, and it's about mechanics. The key word here, the little catchphrase here, is consistency is key, because in mechanics we're talking about conventions, and conventions are things that we just kind of do. A lot of them have rules, but a lot of them I really couldn't tell you where those rules came from. And so what we're going to do is just talk about some of the conventions of English, but whenever there isn't a hard and fast rule, your best bet is to just be consistent. And that's what kind of mechanics, the golden rule when it comes to mechanics is. So let's dive in and take a look at some of these rules and examples, and then we'll go from there. The first part of mechanics deals with capitalization. A lot of us remember the basic rules, like you capitalize the first word in a sentence, but we also capitalize a lot of other things in our language, and here are some examples of those. We capitalize proper nouns. Proper nouns are specific people, places, or things. So when we're talking about going to the lake, we use a lowercase l, but if we say we're going to Lake Superior, it's a specific location that has a name, then we capitalize Lake Superior. We also capitalize time periods, like the Great Depression. But we don't capitalize the unless it's actually 100% part of the name. So we can look at an example of that here in Microsoft Word if we want to. We're all pretty familiar with the band The Beatles, and that's their actual name. It's The Beatles. That's the name of their band. And so whenever we talk about the Beatles, we would talk about them with capital T and capital B because they're the Beatles. But when we're talking about the Romantic period, it's the lowercase t, the Romantic period. Here it's a time period, but the isn't capitalized. The only time we capitalize the is when it's actually part of the actual name of the thing. So we have the Beatles, that's the name of their band, so we capitalize the, it's actually part of their name. But the Romantic period, even though we might always call it the Romantic period, still it's lowercase the. Alright, get back to the presentation here. We also capitalize months, holidays, and days of the week. That's because most of them are all named after proper nouns originally. So we have June, which is named after the Roman goddess Juno. We have Thursday, which was named after Thor's Day, right? Thor's Day. So that's where we get Thursday from. And so we capitalize those, and we capitalize holidays. Note that a time period during the year that we don't capitalize are the seasons, like winter, spring, summer. We don't capitalize those. And that brings us to a little bit of a conundrum. So here's another little example of a little bit of mechanics confusion sometimes. We might have a time where we're going on spring break. And since we don't capitalize the names of seasons, it might be spring break, lowercase s, lowercase b. But you might also think, well, it's a holiday, so maybe we'd call it spring break. Which one's right? Well, it probably depends on the context. I don't think you'll find a definitive hard and fast rule. But, you know, if you make a decision in your first paragraph to call it spring break with a capital S and a capital B, then you should do that in your second paragraph too. The key is to be consistent. And so that's what you want to do. Make a decision about what you think is the most appropriate way to do it. Maybe you think, oh, well, you know, not everybody celebrates spring break as a holiday, so I'm going to do lowercase s and lowercase b. Or, you know, maybe you think, hey, it's a pretty well-known holiday. We're going to go ahead and call it spring break, the holiday, capital S, capital B. The key, again, is to be consistent. If you do it in your first paragraph one way, make sure you do it the same way in your second paragraph as well. All right. Some other capitalization rules that we want to make sure we follow along with are names of languages. We always capitalize those. English, French, Latin, German. We also capitalize specific course titles like Geology 102, I put down there. A lot of people are taking my class Introduction to Composition or Composition. So those would be capitalized. If you say, hey, I'm going to math class, that's going to be a lowercase m because that's just a subject matter. It's not a specific course title. So if we say, I'm going to math class. That's just the subject. It doesn't tell us exactly what the math class is. If we changed it around and said, I'm going to math 140, then that's a specific course title that we would capitalize, right? So that's a little bit of a difference there. Another thing that we always capitalize are people's titles with their proper name. So we have Professor VandeWaa. We have my title plus the proper name, my last name. So we capitalize both of those. Officer McCarthy, we would capitalize those as well. President Obama, right? We'd capitalize those because there's the title with their proper name. If I said the police officer pulled me over, it'd be lowercase p, lowercase o in police officer because we're just talking about a police officer. But if we had, officer so-and-so who pulled me over, then we would capitalize the officer and we'd capitalize their name as well. When it comes to titles of works like books or movies or video games, we capitalize the first word and we always capitalize the major words in the titles of works. So any words, depends on what style you're using, but any word that's longer than 3 letters is a pretty good rule for that, for the major words in titles. We also capitalize the abbreviations that are really well known. So a lot of us know what FBI is, a lot of us know what TV is, a lot of us know it's tax season, so we know what the IRS is. So we capitalize the abbreviations for those common abbreviations. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples. What you might want to do is just take a second and pause the video, and in your notes, go ahead, or on a scrap sheet of paper, just write down and fix the capitalization problems and any other problems that you notice in this sentence. And I'll give you a quick second to do that. You just pause the video, jot down your corrected version of the sentence, and then we'll come back and I'll talk about the answer. Okay, so we have this sentence here. There are many important places that President Obama has visited in the last few years: the Washington Monument, the Grand Canyon, and of course the White House. Well, when we take a look at the corrected version, we want to make sure that we use some of those rules that we just learned about capitalization. So we capitalize the first word in a sentence. That's one that a lot of people know about already. And we say there are many important places that President Obama, here again we have his name with his title, so President Obama has visited in the last few years. The Washington Monument, there's a specific proper noun, and so we capitalize it. And note that we do not capitalize the because it's not actually called the Washington Monument. I can't tell you why we do that, but we just don't capitalize the thes unless it's actually part of the name of the place. The Grand Canyon, so again, proper name, Grand Canyon. And of course, the White House, capital W, capital H. These are all proper nouns, specific places, persons, or things. Here's another example. Go ahead and pause the video real quick, and you can just fix all the capitalization and other problems that you notice here, and then we'll go over it in just a couple seconds. Okay, so we've got this sentence here. I've been doing a lot of reading lately. I've finished Great Expectations, Me Talk Pretty One Day, and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. When we look at the corrected version of that, we, of course, are going to capitalize the I in I've. We always capitalize I when it's by itself because it's a proper noun. So we've got, it's also first word in a sentence, so that makes this one a little bit easier. I've been doing a lot of read lately and have finished Great Expectations. It's a title of a book, so we capitalize the first word and the important words, Great Expectations. Me Talk Pretty One Day, all of those are important words in the title, so we capitalize all of those. And The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, again, we want to capitalize the first word in the title, so we capitalize the here. And then of is one of those smaller, not so important words, so we do not capitalize that one. But the rest of them we all capitalize as part of the title. And of course we added a period at the end. We did that for both of them because they were missing periods. Okay. Another thing that we worry about with mechanics is numbers, how to express numbers on the written page. And so, good rule to follow is to write out any one or two word number, and you separate the compound numbers with hyphens. So we see that 75 there is hyphenated, 70 hyphen 5. Um, and a 1 million, 5 million, 8 bajillion, those are all two word numbers. They look a little nicer on the page than actually writing these long strings of zeros and numerals. So we have words like 100, which again is a two-word number, even though it's more than 2 digits. We can use actual numbers for any specific purpose. So if there's a specific reason that you're using a number, and here's just a few examples, like if you're expressing the scores in a game, or if you're writing someone's address, or if you're expressing statistics like percentages, or amounts of money, or dates in the month. Those are specific purposes that we would actually use the numerals, the Arabic numerals, instead of writing our numbers out. Another number that we might deal with is time, and I generally tell people that you should either write it out or just be really precise with it. Don't mix and match them, and then do your best to be consistent throughout your paper with what you choose to do. Which means that if you do it the precise way, then it won't be weird. If you have a weird time like 8:37, then if you just do it the precise way, it's shorter, and then you're consistent as well. So the precise way would be you just use the numerals and then AM or PM. So 8 o'clock AM. And you can do either lowercase a period m period, which is kind of what people generally recommend, but when you see it expressed, like when you look for the time, or you look on your computer, or you look on your on the internet, they'll always give you the capital AM. So either way, I think it's okay, because you see it capital A, capital M just about everywhere you look. So either one of those is okay. Or you can write the whole thing out if you want to. You could say 8 o'clock in the morning. What you wouldn't want to do is do the 8 o'clock, very precise time, and then do in the morning. Or you wouldn't want to write out 8 o'clock AM. Don't mix and match them. Just pick one and stick with it for your essay. So we can take a look at some examples of this as well. Give it a try. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video real quick and go ahead and fix this sentence with the stuff that you've learned from capitalization and numbers and all that jazz. And we'll talk about it in just a couple seconds here. Okay, you might have noticed that there's a little bit of a tricky rule with numbers that I didn't mention, but that was in part of the reading that we did for my classes, and that is that you never ever start a sentence with a numeral. So you would not want to start a sentence with the number 22% there. And what we want to do is we could change it around a couple different ways. We could fix it by writing it out. So since then we won't start our sentence with a numeral, we would do 22% of American. Note that you want to capitalize American because it's a proper name. Adults tested a level below basic literacy. Or you might say, hey, VandeWaa, you just told me I could use numbers like numerals for percent. And you would be right. So you could go ahead and rephrase the sentence and so that you keep that percentage expression in there instead of writing it out. And so you could say, it's shocking to know that 22% of American adults test the level below basic literacy. That's a fact, but it's a little bit of a twisted fact because I think it just refers to like health and wellness literature, that 20% of American adults can't read health and wellness literature at a 5th grade level, which is still kind of depressing in a lot of ways. Let's look at another example. Go ahead and quick pause the video for and fix this sentence, and then we'll come back in a couple seconds here and take a look at the right answer. Okay, here we have a couple problems here. We arrived at 8:15 in the AM, which sometimes we might hear people say it that way. Oh, I got there at 3 in the AM or whatever, when we're just kind of casually talking with each other. But we wouldn't want to express that in our writing, and we wouldn't want to kind of mix and match our written out letters or written out numbers with our actual numerals and things like that. So we want to fix that somehow, and there's two different ways to do it, as we talked about. You could do the precise time, which I think is probably your best bet, and say we arrived at 8:15 a.m. Or you could write the whole thing out, and you could do we arrived at 8:15 in the morning. Either one of those would be okay. I think, again, your best bet is probably just to use precise times whenever possible, because they just look a little nicer, and we're pretty much used to them, used to seeing them in text anyway. Okay, another thing we worry about with mechanics is using italics. So in your handwritten work, use underlining instead. On the typewriter, we used to underline things because obviously we couldn't have two different fonts on a typewriter. Otherwise, it would have doubled the number of keys that we need to have. And so in your handwritten work, go ahead and just use underlining. You want to underline the things you would normally italicize. And the question then becomes, well, what do we italicize? So we italicize, one of the most common things we italicize are the titles of long or large works. Examples of this include things like books or movies, like films, or titles of video games, titles of works of art we italicize. We italicize the names of musical albums, TV shows. These are all sort of longer or larger works. Titles of shorter works, like articles, which is sort of like a shortened form of a book, or essays, and they're shortened form of a book. Short stories, again, shorter than books. Song titles would go in quotation marks. All of these short works go in quotation marks. So you'd have the album in italics, but then you'd have the song from that album in quotation marks. The TV episode title would go in quotation marks, whereas the TV show would go in italics. So we might have an album like The Dark Side of the Moon that would be in italics, and then we'd have the song Money, which is just one of the songs on the album, going in quotation marks. And I give you an example here where, we just have any generic title goes inside quotation marks for short works. And that's how we delineate them. The longer works go in italics, the shorter works go in quotation marks. And that's going to become much more important later on when we do our research paper. We also italicize the names of specific modes of transportation. So the Challenger was a specific spacecraft, space shuttle. The Titanic was a specific ocean liner. And so sometimes there are specific names for specific modes of transportation. So, like the USS Cole, that was a specific name for a specific ship, and so we would italicize that, italicize the names of those specific modes of transportation. Here again, we run into some confusion. So let's say you named your car. A lot of people do that. They might name their car Bessie or something along those lines. So in your paper, when you're doing a descriptive paper, for example, you might say, we were driving Bessie. So your car's name was Bessie, and you were driving it around. Well, you gave your car a name, so it's capitalized, it's a proper name, but it's also the proper name of a specific car, right, which is a mode of transportation. So is it then going to be we were driving in italics then, Bessie, or in your handwritten work, you'd go ahead and you'd underline it. Which one's right? Well, you could do either one. It's not really a big deal as long as you make sure that it's consistent throughout your essay. So if you do it this way in your first sentence, make sure that you do it the same way in the rest of your paper. And if you do it this way in your first sentence, you want to make sure that you do it the same way throughout your paper. Again, when it comes to mechanics, consistency is the really important thing, and that's what we're looking for. All right, we also capitalize foreign words that are not conventionally used in English. So I usually ask my classes, I say, well, how many of you have heard the word kindergarten? And of course everyone's hand goes up because we've all heard the word kindergarten. Well, kindergarten isn't an English word. It's a word that comes to us from German. It's a German word. And it's kind of an interesting idea. You're gardening your children or you're growing children. It's a weird kind of thing, but we use that all the time. Pretty much everyone's been to kindergarten, and so we know that word. It's conventionally used all the time. A lot of students, though, don't know words like deus ex machina. That's a Latin word, or a Latin phrase anyway, that means God out of the machine. And way back when, in the ancient Greek and Roman plays, they would sometimes have, a lot of problems going on in the play, and then they would lower somebody, an actor, using ropes and pulleys and stuff, a machinery, and that actor would be playing one of the gods, and one of the gods would fix all the problems that were going on in the play. And so that's where that phrase comes to us from, Deus ex machina. It's like a miraculous solution to a problem that kind of comes out of nowhere. And that's from that old, term from the plays when they would, have the gods fix all the problems, and then they would, kind of come down out of the machine, and then they'd come back up into the machine using these pulleys and other mechanisms. And so a lot of people, though, don't know that off the top of their head. They don't, use that in casual conversation the way we might use the word kindergarten in casual conversation. And so we italicize foreign words that are not conventionally used in English like that. We also italicize words as words. The other alternative option for that is to put them in quotation marks, but it gets a little clunky sometimes. So if I'm trying to tell you that the definition of something, I might say something like the definition of the word go is to, and then I might give the definition afterwards, right? So I'm talking about the word as a word. I'm not talking about it, I'm not using it in context, like we're going to go to the movies. I'm talking about it just as a word, right? And we could do that in italics as well. Definition, if I could type today, word go is to, right? And I mentioned on the PowerPoint that it gets a little clunky if you use quotes all the time, because what we'd have here is, we'd have our definition in here in quotation marks, is what we'd have. And then that gets a little weird because then there's quotation marks all over the place. So sometimes it's a little nicer to just use, words as words, putting them in italics. That's one kind of nice way to do it, so it's not so clunky with quotation marks all over the place. But it's up to you. Again, you want to be consistent. If you do it this way in the first sentence of your paper, make sure you do it the same way throughout your essay. If you do it this way in the first paragraph of your paper, make sure that you do it the same way throughout your essay. That's the important thing. And we'll blitzkrieg through and see all the review things here. We also use italics to denote emphasis, but we try and do that as little as possible. So sometimes if we want to emphasize a word in a sentence, we use italics. We don't write it all out in caps or anything like that. We would use italics to do that instead. It was really big, and we maybe try and emphasize the word really to say that it was really big. We don't want to do that with every sentence in our paper, but sometimes if we really want to emphasize a word, we would put it in italics. Okay. Well, it seems like a lot of rules, but we're going to use those now real quick to take a look at a couple examples. So again, take a look at the sentence here. Go ahead and pause the video for as long as it takes you to fix this sentence, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it together in a couple seconds here. Remember that in your handwritten work, you underline things that would be italicized. So give this one a try, and then we'll talk about the right answer in just a couple seconds here. Okay, so this one requires a little bit of our knowledge from capitalization, a little bit of our knowledge from italics, a little bit of our knowledge from punctuation altogether. So we have Han Solo and Chewbacca fly the Millennium Falcon through an asteroid field in The Empire Strikes Back. Well, when we're all said and done with it, it should look a little bit like this. So hopefully this is something very similar to what you had on your practice sheet there. So Han Solo, proper noun. We want to capitalize his name. Chewbacca, proper noun, we want to capitalize his name. Millennium Falcon, we want to capitalize, and we also want to italicize it because it is in fact a specific name of a specific transportation mode, which is a spaceship. So Millennium Falcon should always be in italics. Through an asteroid field in The Empire Strikes Back. That's the name of the movie. And so we would capitalize the important words in the title, and then we would also italicize the title of this longer work like a movie, right? A lot of my students get confused. They think they should capitalize asteroid field, but a dead giveaway here is an asteroid field. It's just any one of them. There are a lot of asteroid fields out there. It doesn't have a specific name. It's just a generic, any old asteroid field. So we wouldn't capitalize that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at another example here. Go ahead and pause the video, give it a try, and then we'll go over the answers in just a couple seconds here for the correct version. All right. It does help to know that The Hound of the Baskervilles is the name of a book, in case that is going to be helpful to you. I think it might when we look at the right answer. So go ahead and pause the video. We'll take a look at just a few seconds here. Okay, we have in The Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson get lost out on a foggy moor. So when we look at the right answer, this is hopefully something very similar to what you have on your practice sheet as well. So in The Hound of the Baskervilles, there's the title of the book. Note that we capitalize the first word in the title, and then all the important words, of and the, not so important in the middle of our title, but since the is the first word in the title, we always capitalize the first word in the title of a book or a longer work. So we have The Hound and Baskervilles all capitalized, and then the whole title of the book is in italics. In your handwritten work, of course, you'll have that underlined instead. Then we've got Sherlock Holmes, he's the proper name, so we capitalize those. We got Dr. Watson, the title plus his last name, his proper name, and so we capitalize those two things. And then we, of course, put a period at the end. Foggy Moor, some people get confused about that one. They think, oh, maybe we should capitalize those. But again, here it's a foggy moor. It's just any one of them. It's not, specifically named moor. It's not anything else. And a moor is just a swamp. That's all that is. That's what that word means, in case you haven't seen that word before. So that's what the right answer looks like for that. The last thing that we talk about with mechanics is the hyphen, and we use the hyphen for a couple reasons. You might not use it that often, but we'll look at some of the reasons that we use it on this slide. We use the hyphen for compound words, so a lot of times words over time become compound words because they're used together. So way back in the early days of email, it used to be called electronic mail. It was two separate words. Because we had mail and then we had electronic mail. So they were two separate words. Well, pretty soon it became electronic mail with a hyphen, and then it was e-mail, and then now I see people doing it just regular old email, just boom, blasting through email, just one word, no hyphen anymore. And that's generally the trajectory of words. Words tend to do that when they become linked together in a sense. And so we have words like water repellent, or self. All the self words are hyphenated. Self-esteem, self-aggrandizement, self-loathing. Those are all hyphenated because they work together as one concept, just like water repellent does, right? If you have a pair of water repellent shoes, they're not water shoes, they're not repellent shoes, they're water repellent shoes. Those two words work together as one main idea to tell us that those shoes will repel water. The best way to find out if it's a compound word is to check a dictionary if you can. You can also Google it. That's another great way to see if it's a compound word. They'll usually tell you if a word is hyphenated or not. If a compound word is not in the dictionary, if it's not hyphenated in the dictionary, then you can just treat it as two words. That's okay. So when in doubt, treat something as two words. All right. We also, as we've mentioned already, use the hyphen for the written form of fractions and numbers. So when we say 1/4, we separate that with a hyphen there. 1-4. Compound numbers, 25, 37, 93, all of those are hyphenated as well. Okay. The last one's a little tricky, but I think with a couple examples we'll figure this out pretty easily. We use the hyphen when we're with words that work together as an adjective. That's similar to that first idea of these compound words. But sometimes they're not always compound. And so the hyphen then clarifies when they're working together as an adjective and when they're not. And so we want to hyphenate words that work together as an adjective, especially when clarity is needed. So when we have a well-known politician, if he's feeling well, then we would just say he's a well-known politician. So he's known, people know who he is, and he's feeling well, but this lets us know that he's a well-known politician. With the hyphen in there, that those two words act together to let us know that he's just really well known. A lot of people know him. So he's a well-known politician. Some more examples of that include things like a heavy metal detector. So without the hyphen, that just means that we have a metal detector that weighs a lot. It's really heavy. But if we were to add the hyphen in there, in between heavy and metal, so if we put the hyphen in here, in between heavy and metal, it's a heavy metal detector. In that case, it detects heavy metals. And so that hyphen would add some clarity there where it needs to be. A long anticipated letter. Here's another sort of string of words that we have a couple adjectives there. And so is it a long letter that you've been knowing was coming your way, so it was an anticipated letter that happens to be long, or was it a long anticipated letter, a letter that you've been waiting for a long time? So if we put the hyphen in there, it tells us that it's a long anticipated letter, that you've been waiting for it for a long time. Without the hyphen, it tells us that it's a very long letter and that you've been waiting for it and knew that it was coming, right? So we need the hyphen in there usually to clarify exactly what it is that we mean, because with just the way they are right now, it's a little bit confusing, or it's telling us something that maybe we don't actually mean in our writing. Don't have any examples for the hyphen because not a lot of time. We don't use it that often. But if you do have questions about it, you can always Google it or ask me about it. A couple final thoughts about mechanics here. The first one is don't be afraid to do the work. You have to proofread your own work. You have to put the time and effort in to do that, to sort of look for these little things, the little nitty-gritty details of editing. Have a dictionary with you. I always keep a dictionary out when I'm doing some writing. I have a hard copy of Webster's Dictionary or the Oxford Compact Dictionary, and so I always keep that on my shelf and keep it next to my desk. You can, of course, always use the interwebs, as we like to joke about calling them. Because you can always check, dictionary.com or, just Google something and see. A lot of times people have had the same question that you had. So should I capitalize spring break? Go check around and see what people say about it, and then, make an executive decision and be consistent. But that all requires a little bit of work on your part. You have to do a little bit of work to get these things right, to find the right answers. A lot of this mechanics stuff is up to your own discretion. Like we saw, there are a lot of different ways to do things that are all correct. You just have to sometimes make an executive decision. Sometimes even I don't know all the rules. I know a lot about English, but I don't know all the rules about mechanics. And sometimes even I'll check things up. Last semester, for example, my students asked me, well, when do you capitalize the word Earth? Well, that's a really good question. Turns out you capitalize Earth when it's with other celestial bodies that are proper names. We capitalize them with the other ones. So Earth and Mars, capital E, capital M, our planets in our solar system. But if we're just talking about, we live on Earth, then we would just use a, lowercase e. So, there's some kind of crazy rules about that too. And I had to go find them. I had to go figure those out. If you can't find anything concrete, so sometimes people give you conflicting reports. Maybe some people say spring break should be capitalized, other people say it should be lowercase. Then just make sure to be consistent. So if you're ever in doubt about something, if you're ever kind of having to hazard a guess, then just be consistent. That's the key. Pay attention to this stuff. You want to make sure that you're paying attention while you're writing, but don't get bogged down with the details. So if you're writing a draft and things are going really well, you get a lot of good ideas flowing, don't stop in the middle of what you're doing to go figure out if you need to hyphenate something. Save that for the proofreading, save that for the revising and editing later, because you don't want to dump all those ideas that you had out of your brain when you're trying to figure out, oh, well, should I hyphenate this or not? And then you lose track of what you were thinking about. So don't get bogged down with the details. While you're writing, just stick with the writing. Save this little nitty-gritty stuff for the end when you're doing the revising and editing. That's the end of the stuff on mechanics. It's the shortest presentation we've got, and there's no worksheet to go along with it. So hopefully you took some kind of careful notes, and hopefully those examples helped you see things a little bit. And if you have any questions, you can always ask me. This is a little bit of a placeholder, so I think I might remake this presentation a little bit later. But I think it'll do for the purposes that it needs to for now. So thanks for listening, and hopefully I will see you watching some other videos. All right.